watch any of this video, there's a couple things I have to say right off the bat. One is this is an incredibly terrible idea. I really don't recommend doing this at all. The other thing is I used a different camera to shoot the actual main video. I greatly apologize, but it's in and out of focus. I tried to reshoot the video, and for whatever reason, the second video just didn't turn out as good as the first video, explanation-wise. So that's what this is. This is like an intro to the other video. So just watch, just bear with the out of focusness of it. There you go. Welcome back. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that this is my Invacare Home Fill 2 oxygen compressor. If you watched any of my other videos, you'll notice that this is the first time I ever actually shot this thing with the top off of it. Well, the top's off of it because, quite frankly, I blew it up. Before I purchased this, I did about half the amount of research that I should have. And one of the things that I read was that you're not supposed to run more than 1,000 psi in one of these 250 cubic foot bottles. Why is that? Well, these machines were never designed or intended to run for 36 hours straight. They just weren't. So to fill one of these bottles from scratch is about 36 hours. To 2,000 psi. I was also warned, don't run it to 2,000 psi because you'll blow the seals out. Well, imagine that. I blew the seals out. So what is this thing? I'm going to set aside the electronic wizardry that's inside of this because I don't want to say it's simple, but it is relatively simple. Inside of this thing is an oxygen sensor that detects purity of the oxygen. And when it detects the proper purity of the oxygen to compress the oxygen, it turns the compressor on. What's the compressor? The compressor is a 5-cylinder radial engine. It's really cool. What it does is it starts out, I did not measure the bore cylinders of pistons 1, 2, and 3 because I didn't take those apart. I didn't take those apart because this thing actually still does work. But I did measure the cylinders, or the pistons and the bore cylinders of cylinders number 4 and 5. I'm just going to use very, very, very round numbers here. So the cylinder number 4 is, and this is all imperial, is 0.462, I think. Don't quote me. Don't go by that. Cylinder number 5 is like 0.26. 0.261 or something like that. I wrote the numbers down. I don't have them right in front of me. I'm going to do another video. When I get the seals for this thing, I'm going to do another video and I'm going to show exactly what happened. This video is more of like, okay, now that you've been bitten by karma, how do you undo your stupidity? So what I did, under the recommendation of somebody else that apparently has blown these things up, is I bypassed cylinders number 5 and 4, or 4 and 5. So I'm going to show real quick exactly how I did that, because the machine still does work without it. The machine isn't smart enough to know the difference between, isn't really smart enough to know what comes out of it. There's no sensors beyond a high pressure sensor, a high pressure blowout sensor on cylinder number 5. Oh, it's actually two things. It's a high pressure shut off switch and a blowout disc. So let me show exactly what's going on here. Okay, so you can't see in the video, you cannot see the other two cylinders. But those are, I don't want to say they're unimportant, but they're actually the most important ones because those are the ones that we're using. But cylinder number 1 is all the way back here on the back of the machine, and it's pretty large in diameter. It's about 2 inches in diameter. Again, I did not check the bore size on those. I did not take those apart. If I had a spare machine, I probably would have disassembled If I had a spare one of these, I would have taken the whole thing apart to see exactly what was inside of it. Measured all the cylinder bores, and because that's just the way I am, and marked the outside of the cylinders with bore sizes, which is what I should have done here, but I didn't. So you have cylinder 1 in the back, cylinder 2, and then cylinder 3. If you follow the lines, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you can follow a basic flow chart, you can tell exactly what's going on. Inside of the cylinder head here is a one-way check valve. I've seen a couple people beat on these things because they say the check valves are clogged. Check valves generally don't clog. They do, but in this particular case, mine were not clogged. I blew some high pressure, relatively high pressure, only 150 psi through the check valves, and it was blowing. It was moving just fine. It was moving air just fine one way and not the other, so therefore it's flowing the correct direction. So what this machine does is it starts out large, and then as it progresses through the system here, through this octopus of tubing, the cylinder bores get progressively smaller. Another thing you're going to want to do is you're going to mark number 5 here, or I'm sorry, number 4 at T top, because this is out. If you flip it over, if you put it in backwards, it won't. The machine won't work because the check valve is working and doing what it's supposed to do. So what I did was I used a 7/16 wrench. Actually, because I'm a mechanic, I had line wrenches. I would suggest using a line wrench. Don't use one of these. Use a real wrench. So use a line wrench to disconnect cylinder number 4. Okay, so this is cylinder number 4 out. I also disconnected cylinder number 3 into cylinder number 4. So cylinder number 3 is over here that you can't see. This is the cylinder number 4 in, and you'll notice that this is the filling valve, check valve, do flimajiggy. This is my whip hose. So I'm going directly from cylinder number 3 right out of the system. I bypassed cylinder number 4 and cylinder number 5. What's the result of that? Well, the result is the machine still works, but it doesn't work properly. There's a couple problems with doing what I did. And I'm going to go over those real quick because it's just the way things work. Okay, so you'll hear that I have everything up and running. So right now I'm warming up the system because I want to run it to explain exactly, once again, to explain exactly what I'm fairly sure what's going on here. So the electronic wizardry inside of this machine is waiting until it gets enough pressure, oxygen pressure and purity to start the compressor. Now, in my other video I explained that I have a pressure relief valve in line here with the whip hose. I've released all the pressure to the tank, and the tank is turned off. The tank's turned off, so there's no pressure in this whip hose. I use the whip hose to see whether or not I'm building pressure, and this machine will build pressure. As a matter of fact, hopefully I'll yammer on long enough, or I'll just edit it out, to show that it's building pressure and what happens. Now, because I bypassed cylinders number 4 and 5, there's a couple problems going on with that, and I'm pretty sure, I'm 99% sure, by doing this I have exponentially lowered the life expectancy of this machine. Why? Well, the number one reason is a radial engine operates best when it's in balance. So basically right now the machine is running out of balance. The engineers that built this thing knew that what the torque specifications, or it's not torque. I don't know, I forget my 12th grade physics class here. So the power distribution should be equal between each one of the pistons. That's why these things are so expensive, because you're not paying for the physical materials themselves, you're paying for the engineer that came up with making this thing run in a balanced way. I am running this thing unbalanced at this point. So the other thing is I'm running it with open cylinder heads. And by doing so, I've bypassed all of the gizmos that, or all the mechanical stuff that makes the air that comes into this thing, the oxygen that comes into this, dry. So the chances are that I'm going to further score these cylinder bores because of moisture in the air. These things want to be dry. I've seen a couple people bypass the electronic wizardry that makes this thing work, and I don't think it's a great idea. This is an accumulator tank with a desiccant in it. Oxygen wants to be dry. All compressed gases want to be dry. They're never going to be anhydrous, but at least they'll be dry. Because if the cylinders aren't dry on the inside, eventually, oh, there it goes. Eventually what's going to happen is the cylinder bores are going to get scored by just corrosion. When I pulled cylinder number 4 and cylinder number 5 heads off, there was a good bit of material inside of there that was the seals. I did take pictures of the seals in case you wanted to know what they look like. They're not great pictures, but they are pictures. So, because I disconnected the system, and you'll see it go out of balance, because I disconnected cylinders number 4 and number 5, this does this all the time. This isn't because I disconnected it, this was the way it runs. Okay, so because I disconnected cylinders number 4 and number 5 from the system, it's no longer in balance pressure-wise inside the machine. So these are basically just, it's like taking a spark plug out of a V8, taking 4 spark plugs out of a V8 engine. The thing cranks over a lot easier because it's not building whatever the amount of compression. It's 160 psi or 180 psi per cylinder. It's not doing that now. In this case, it would be 1500 and then 2000. So whatever between. I didn't hook up. I don't have a pressure gauge that goes up high enough without modifying one of my regulators to say what the psi coming out of each cylinder is. But what I can tell you is that when this machine reaches 1000 psi now in this current configuration, it shuts off. So assumption of, the hypothesis is that cylinder number 3 hits 1000 psi. 1000 psi goes from cylinder number 3 into cylinder number 4, and then from cylinder number 4 to cylinder number 5, it's then compressed to 2000 psi. When it reaches 2000 psi back pressure, the electronic pressure release, or the electric pressure release valve, shuts off the electronic gizmos in the machine. If this was to somehow or another be damaged, there's a blowout. There it goes. You can hear it laboring and then shuts off. That's the out of balanceness. I've reached 1000 psi. And as soon as you release the pressure, it just starts running again. Now, what does that mean? The short answer is I don't know. Other than you're creating a problem. This is creating a problem, and I don't recommend doing it. But if you're in the same position I am, which is I don't have $160 right now to purchase the piston seals, then this is kind of what you're stuck with. Now, before I blew the cylinders up, before I blew the pistons up, I would just let this thing run unattended because I had done the math to figure out how long it took to fill it. I now have done the math again, because I've changed the parameters of the way the machine fills. And I'm fairly confident that if I have about 400 PSI in this tank, I can let it run, 10 or 11 hours while I sleep. I don't sleep 10 or 11 hours, but I can leave it sit for that long, chugging away before it fills the cylinders. I wouldn't do this, but I'm telling you how to do it, if that makes any sense. So, there you go. I mean, it's working. It's absolutely building pressure. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's just not doing it up to 2,000 PSI. So what I'm going to do, what I normally do is as soon as I start working, I turn this thing on. It's the best analogy I can come up with for using one of these things is you're filling a 55-gallon drum with a quarter-inch hose. This is 1/8 inch, like 16th inch IB. This is like capillary tubing. But at the bottom of the 55-gallon drum, you have a 1/2 inch hole. Now, as soon as you close that 1/2 inch hole at the bottom of the 55-gallon drum, this thing's still running. So you're running at a deficit all the time, but you are filling it, if it may be ever so slowly. If you blow the cylinders, out like I did, if you blow the seals out like I did, and you don't bypass the system, and you don't bypass these, you lose all of the pressure down to whatever the check valve is on cylinder number 3. So the check valve on cylinder number 3 is about 500 PSI. The check valve on this particular, on the outlet is 2,000 PSI. So this is a 2,000 PSI check valve. This is a 2,000 PSI check valve. That's a 500 PSI check valve. How do I know that? Because I ran the thing with the blown cylinders. What I did was I took the, wish in one hand, shit in the other. I took the heads and the cylinder, the cylinders out of these things. I left the pistons in place because I didn't want to disassemble this thing. This also sounds like it's got a bad wrist pin, but I'm not going to get into rebuilding wrist pins on this thing. When I took the cylinders out of here, both of them they're polished. They were highly polished on the inside, which I expected, but they were also somewhat scored with something. I actually took I took some really fine compound, non-petroleum based compound that I have for painting, or for when I paint cars and polish metal with, but it's non-petroleum based. And I tried to clean the bores up as carefully as I could. By doing that, I know I changed the bore size. I'm actually, when all of this is said and done, I have access to a tool shop, and I'm going to take the cylinder heads to the tool maker and have him measure the cylinder heads, or the cylinders, and come up, and he can tell me what the bore is. His equipment and his expertise is a lot greater than mine. I can read a mic, I can read a caliper, I know how to work a snap gauge, but when you're down to the clearances that are required to make this thing operate, you're into like 5 or maybe 6 decimal points, 5 or 6 points below my equipment's measuring ability, and he has that equipment. So there you go. How to bypass cylinders number 4 and number 5 in a long-winded manner.